I am Mike Vanderpool. I am the Make It Happen podcast. Kind of see the t-shirt here. This is a podcast that we have been doing for about 2 months now, since the start of 2025. And it is basically me talking to cool people doing cool things. I have run into a whole bunch of people over the past decade of teaching, building, doing, learning. My guest today, Manav Misra, is someone who I have worked with in the software development instructional space. Really cool guy, is into wrestling and a whole bunch of other fun stuff that I also used to enjoy. So today, my guest, Manav, and I will, Man of Distinction, as we used to call him over at the former place of employment. We're going to talk about anything and everything, Manav. So it's basically like a steel cage match with no cage.
Okay, steel cage, invisible cage.
I'm just hoping I can get one opportunity to pull off my Randy Macho Man Bonesaw is Ready impersonation, because I do that pretty well. So, Manav, how are you today?
Oh, I'm doing excellent. Yeah, I mean, speaking of wrestling things, huge historic Royal Rumble yesterday for 2025. That's pretty exciting coming off of that. So got up this morning and worked on some curriculum stuff and a couple little side projects, hit the gym, and now I'm here. So I took a shower after the gym, so I don't smell bad. Don't want to smell bad on the podcast. Yeah.
Thank you for not inventing smell-o-vision yet.
Yes.
Smell-o-vision is like that one technology that still has not hit us from back on the Jetsons and everything else from back when we were kids, right?
Yeah.
So I just saw a clip of Logan Paul and we'll back up a step. Royal Rumble, I believe, because I haven't watched it in decades, but Royal Rumble is where it's last person standing wins, and every so often a new wrestler enters the match, and if they get thrown out and touch the floor, they're out.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. So the Royal Rumble was originally a concept created by Pat Patterson. I forget the exact year, maybe 98 or something. But yeah, the concept is basically what you said. So there's 30 people involved. The first two come out, and then that's when the bell starts ringing. So they go at it, and every 2 minutes, the next contestant or next entrant comes out. So there's always this huge anticipation. They have the big timer there. The audience counts down from 10 seconds, and you never know who's going to pop up. A lot of times there's a couple of surprises, a couple of Hall of Famers or old school people. But yeah, that's pretty much. And then to be eliminated, just like you said, it's not about pins or submissions. It's about once somebody goes over the top rope and both of their feet hit the floor. So sometimes there's a little controversy because somebody will slip through the middle rope and hit the floor, but they're not eliminated. So that'll play off a little bit because the person okay, I got rid of them, but they'll hang around because they're technically not eliminated because they didn't go over the top rope. They went over the middle rope. Nothing like that happened yesterday, but that's something. So, the Logan Paul. Oh, you saw Logan Paul. Yeah.
That's the only thing I saw. The clip where he got slingshotted from the ring and landed over on a table, so he wasn't out, and then he had a drink and whatever.
Yeah, no, actually, he didn't really. I mean, he kind of got. It was more just his pure raw athletic ability, and he's kind of not liked, generally speaking, in the wrestling community. I happen to be, maybe I don't want to get shunned by any wrestling fans watching this. I'm not going to buy T-shirts or anything, but I do appreciate what Logan Paul brings on it. But no, he made that leap from the ring apron all the way to the middle of the announcer's table to keep himself alive. Then he leaped from there to the little barrier where the crowd is. Yeah, somebody did throw him a drink, a prime, I presume. And then he jumped back onto the steel steps and back into the ring. So yeah, there's usually one or two spots where something like that will happen, and he had that spot this time around. So yeah, it was pretty nice. He was one of the last three, if I remember correctly.
And Logan Paul, as a influencer, Pokemon collector, he's been kind of all over the place. This is just another way where WWE has done a phenomenal job of just thinking outside the ropes, for lack of a better way to say it, for how they broaden their audience, right?
Yeah, there's on Logan Paul, one of the reasons I appreciate it is in terms of the in-ring ability, the execution of the moves, the athleticism, he's picked up on that and the psychology of it. And getting the crowd, taking what we call in wrestling, like getting heat from the crowd. Like if, as a heel, you want to be booed and not liked by the crowd, and to maximize that psychological effect. But just the in-ring performances, the athletic ability, it's pretty amazing. I mean, if he was to stick with it, I mean, I would say that he's going to be a Hall of Famer if he continues, along this path. So, yeah, pretty awesome Royal Rumble overall, yes.
I think I would be a heel, Manav. I think.
Yeah, it's always interesting because the faces, the other side, for the baby face versus the heel. The faces are the ones that I'm not going to pretend like I know all about the business aspect of it, but I would assume that they probably get more financial reward because of all the merch sales. People aren't buying heel shirts, so I don't know how they work that out with the contracts and things. But yeah, aside from possibly making less money, whatever. I mean, to ever have a chance to be involved with that business in any way, shape, or form, I would leap at that opportunity. Maybe one day I could be a referee, possibly, or a manager. I mean, I'm definitely not going to be in the ring.
Well, managers get in the ring. Remember? Oh, geez, I'm trying to think back to who the manager was back in the day. Mr. Fuji, wasn't he a manager? Yeah, who was the guy that was the had the mullet and the oh geez, all of them had mullets. That's hard to back in the day. The Honky Tonk Man's manager, right? Jimmy. Oh man.
Oh yeah, the fastest mouth in the South. Jimmy. That is not Jimmy Page. No, that's Led Zeppelin. So it'll come to me later on. But I remember his nickname. The fastest mouth in the South.
I could see him clear as day, right? And Miss Elizabeth was actually a manager who got in the ring, kind of, sort of there. So
yeah, they get in the ring. But
how did you care about wrestling? Like, where did this come from, man?
So I never cared about wrestling. Like as a kid, like I never watched wrestling. I didn't really care about it. It was what I watched, like Voltron and Transformers and all that stuff. I didn't care about pro wrestling. Yeah, I know. And in college, my roommate in the dorm, so it's just like one room, and he's got his TV on this side, and he would have it on. He wasn't necessarily like a huge wrestling fan, but he had on WCW Monday Nitro, and it was on in the background. I just kind of looked over, and at the moment that I looked over, it was the NWO Black and White. And that would be the heel Hulk Hogan, Hollywood Hogan, coming out there with, Kevin Nash and Scott Hall. And the entrance was like super cool, like with the strobe light effect, the just the music. I was like, oh, so I sat down and looked at their entrance for a minute. Then I started wondering, well, why this is Hulk Hogan? I thought he was all American, but he's like out here, as a heel now. So that captivated my interest. And then I saw Scott Hall in his match. He would do the bit where he would have his toothpick and then he would chuck it at somebody. And just that silly gimmick. And then I wanted to know what was going to happen next week, and then I got sucked into it for about 2 or 3 years. So yeah, I was into the I never watched WWE or WWF. It was always WCW for about 3 years. And obviously, as history goes, it kind of went down the tubes, after a certain point. And then after that, I didn't really watch wrestling, but then I got back into it like in 2005 with Edge. Adam Copeland or Edge and John Cena were having a pretty big feud. I got sucked into that. And then for a few years, you would just watch WrestleMania. Like, I'm just going to catch up once a year, WrestleMania. And then one time, 2016, I turned it on and both of my daughters sat down and started watching. They were asking me questions. So since 2016, I've been diehard and into it. And I try to keep up with as much of it as I possibly can. So ironically, I'm more into it as a grown, mature adult, theoretically, than I ever was as a kid or even in college.
That's interesting because I'm the exact opposite, right?
Exactly. Most people are the opposite. I used to watch it, Attitude Era, all that stuff. I never watched any of that. I've seen clips, of course.
I enjoyed it as a kid. They had the cartoon back in the day, right? Captain Lou Albano.
Yeah.
All that type of stuff.
Mario Brothers. Talking about the Mario Brothers cartoon.
I think it was prior to that, I think there was a WWF cartoon because it was
Really?
WWF then became W. Yeah,
Right.
there's a kids after school Saturday morning cartoon with
I
Hulk
missed that.
Hogan,
Okay.
Captain Lobano. Yeah, it does exist. So, and then
I'll have to
I
look
went
that
away
up.
from it for a while, and then I came back right around the same time you probably started watching it, right? The Wolfpack. Oh, right.
Oh yeah.
Um, and
Well, yeah,
then
that
there,
was like a year after I watched because it was just
yeah,
NWO Black and White, and then we got the
yes.
Wolfpack NWO Black and Red, and there was a whole
Yes.
storyline with Goldberg and everything else. So yeah,
And there was a I think it was an N64 game THQ
yeah,
put out, WCW
mhm,
versus whatever wrestling, and
yeah,
we used to love that game, man.
yeah.
I used I used to love being Norman Chad, or not Norman Chad, Norman Smiley. For whatever reason, I love Norman Smiley, man.
Yeah, I
Uh,
played the games and stuff. I mean, I'm not into the gaming as much, but apparently there was the big release of the 2K25. You know, it was also this weekend on Friday. So yeah,
well, we could talk about wrestling all day, but I'd have to kind of
yeah,
fake it because it's been a while. So you
yeah,
and I, though, our history kind of we met through a company that was designing and delivering tech curriculum. And
yeah,
picking your brain and talking to you about it because you've been delivering tech curriculum in a lot of different environments in the community college space through coding
yeah,
boot camps. And
yeah.
I'd really just like to know, what are you doing now when it comes to teaching and building curriculum?
Yeah, so I'm just doing the community college class this semester. It's 100% online. Basically the first real programming class that the students have. They just picked up HTML and CSS, and I'm doing like web development, mostly JavaScript. But the interesting thing there is that the very class that I'm teaching, I actually took this class like I don't know 12, 13 years ago, the exact same class, got an A in it and everything. And when I finished up those classes, I started doing like my freelancing and stuff. And I realized it was such a huge disconnect between, again, I'm not saying I got an A to brag. I'm just saying I got an A and I maximized the knowledge theoretically. Even so, it was a huge disconnect. And I basically was like, okay, so I pretty much have to self teach. So I self taught everything.
Let me pause you for a second.
Yeah.
There was a disconnect between like what they taught you and what you needed
Yes.
in the real world. Okay.
Yeah, to actually build a real project. I would say one of the biggest things that was missing. So the first like freelance project I worked on was actually here where I live in the city of Columbia, Illinois, and I was the intern. But usually intern means you're like have some guidance and stuff, but no, it just means that they just were interested in somebody, to kind of, build stuff for free, which is fine, but it wasn't really an internship. So I had to build this project involving matching volunteer opportunities with people who want to volunteer, et cetera, et cetera. And I really didn't know what the heck I was doing. So what I would do in that case, I would like get a couple things working, and then I would make a copy of the project, and then I would make a couple things working. And I ended up with like 50 copies of this project. And if something broke, I would have to open up multiple things and try to splice the code back together. And for anyone that maybe is wondering where I'm going with this, what I basically was doing was what Git and GitHub do, right? And that's what I came to realize after the fact. I was manually, like I would save a directory and I would say, okay, version 3, add navbar, basically writing a commit message in Git. And I was doing this, man, I was like, how the heck did I not get taught Git and GitHub during this stuff? So fast forward, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, let me pause just for a quick second.
Yeah.
So for our non-technical folks out there, Git and GitHub, Git is a software that actually manages the version of a document that you're working on. So where you've seen maybe in some of your circles, folks out there, a -1 or -2 or -3 or *1, *2 or *final at the end of a file name, as people try to use the file name as part of the versioning system. The software developers have solved this with a software called Git, and GitHub is one of the tools that is a user interface for better, easier access to using the Git software to keep track of your documents.
Yeah, it's basically like a Google Docs, but see, Google Docs is automated, goes up to the cloud. If you need to roll back, you kind of just have to hunt and pack, and it's just. But in Git, we can make like one specific change, whether that's one file or multiple files, whatever the case may be. We can capture that snapshot. We can add it and make a commit message that clearly describes what we just did, like add navigation bar. And so that is captured in the project history so that if I'm working on something else and I need to go back to that, I can really clearly tell what happened at each stage of the project. So it's great for solo developers, but even as part of a team. But yeah, this was one of the things that I was like, this is something that's very strange that was missed. Among a lot other things that I discovered, I was like, the textbook that they gave or whatever, it didn't help me to do the work I needed to do. So when I was invited to teach that very same class a few years later, I said, okay, but I need full creative control and creative freedom. I'm not going to be using the textbook. I'm revamping the entire thing to make it more applicable to the real world. And that's what I've been doing ever since then with that particular class. And then sometimes I teach like the next part of that class. But yeah, one of the biggest things, and sorry to say, as far as I know, my class is still probably the only one that actually teaches things like Git and GitHub. So coming back to the online class, even though it's a JavaScript class, 4 weeks into it, I still haven't even mentioned, I've mentioned JavaScript. We haven't even started JavaScript yet. We spent the first week learning some basic terminal commands so they can do the basics in there. After that, we've spent some time learning Markdown, which that's pretty easy to pick up if they already know HTML. So
we use that as a way to create documentation. It's just a way to mark up your documents to imply what headings are and styling of the document.
Absolutely, and that's more portable than HTML, which has to be rendered in the browser. Even tools like Notion, GitHub, various websites. It's a very portable format where you can upload or use Markdown, and it'll style it and render it for you.
It's also more efficient because one character in Markdown can do what you need at least 8 characters to do in HTML.
Right. Or if you're just using like Microsoft Word or something, I guess you can pick up the shortcut keys, highlight the word and Control B or Command B, or I can just put an asterisk in front of it, type an asterisk after it, and I'm all done. So case, for instance. So yeah, we haven't even touched, we're going to start JavaScript on the second half of this week. But that's some of the approaches that I took. This is not just going to open up a text. We don't use any textbook. I have a couple of textbooks I reference for, like they always send me textbooks. Hey, what about this one? And I was I opened up the one they just sent me, and it's talking about things like this is declaration called use strict. And I checked the year on the textbook. I'm like, we don't do this anymore. This is the disconnect from the real world. So what I'm noticing in this community college, or just maybe in academia in general, is there is a disconnect between folks that are perpetual academic instructors, sort of like, maybe it's like the ivory tower thing, where they're just trapped in those textbooks and things. They do their jobs, they do the best that they can, but I guess to brag on someone like myself a little bit, if we're coming in with that we're just teaching part-time, just 1 or 2 classes, then that opens up the fact that we're actually building real stuff during the day. And so we have that more real world experience that's just not going to be replicated in any textbook. By the time you create a 400-page textbook and go through all the steps and everything like that, this moves so quickly, it's not even worth it. So I actually just create my own ongoing curriculum, record videos and all that stuff.
I remember when I took over teaching Introduction to HTML and CSS at the community college, there was a textbook, and that textbook had lessons on using like transitions to skew and rotate images. And I'm like, nobody ever would do this. What are we doing? Like, why would you skew it in browser, right? Like, it doesn't make any sense at all. So yeah.
Well, I'm surprised the textbook actually covered CSS transitions. I thought you were going to say it was talking about XHTML or something like that, from 10 years ago.
I think when it also included, and this was again 10 years ago, included Dreamweaver as a requirement for the
Yeah.
course, which,
Yeah.
for those of you that don't know, Dreamweaver was never a good option for coding, I would argue. But anyway,
Yeah.
so you're teaching beginners, and I teach beginners, and teaching
Yeah.
beginners often, there's often challenges, a lot of different reasons, right? People come in with different levels of understanding how computers
Yeah.
work, how file systems work. Sounds like you're
Yes.
taking an approach where you're kind of backing up and making no assumptions that they know anything.
Yes.
How's that working out for you?
Yeah, actually so like I said, the first few weeks, we haven't even talked about JavaScript. You mentioned the file system. Yeah, we had a lesson baked in there. Okay, open it, whether on Windows or a Mac, you're familiar with this file system, your documents, pictures, things like that. Let's keep that open. Let's open up the terminal and let's make a directory here. So, because I realized that some folks just think like the terminal, the command line interface is like some other alternate universe or whatever. So in order to make that connection, we're replicating what you do in terms of making files and folders, in your GUI. So we had a lesson about that: files, folders, directories. Because folks are not always used to that. With this, everything just goes up to the cloud somewhere magically. We don't think about that these days.
Yeah, you can't make any assumption that students know where files are stored on their computer anymore.
Yeah.
It's all been abstracted away, and they're not learning it in school. One of the things tangential. So the baby step further from that, I'll have the file explorer, finder, whatever GUI, graphical user interface open. I'll have the terminal open, and then I'll also open their development environment where they actually code, so they can see how all of them are just viewports into the same thing.
Yeah, nice.
You change one thing. When you introduce the IDE, that's a good way to do that, because there is, like you said, that disconnect, and the only way I think to teach that disconnect is to show you changed it here. Oh, look, automatically it's changed over here. Well, it's not automatically changed over there. It's just looking at the same
thing from different views, basically. We just opened up VS Code like last week, and we just so the last week's lesson was the first time that we opened up VS Code, and we just created a very basic text file, like a TXT. Oh, I did HTML and CSS because they've already had that. I didn't have to do text files, so they already know HTML, CSS. So like, this is probably pretty similar to what you saw last semester. And so we just opened that up to see like how things work. You can change your theme. I gave them a bunch of recommended extensions that are going to help us in the class later on. And then we made a small change to like the heading or something. And that's when we did a little bit of Git. Okay, so now I'm going to look at this file at the stage area. So that's how we kind of did the basics of Git and the VS Code in one. Yeah, I'm actually making them do a lot more reading, and then their homework reading, as in the stuff that sometimes I link to like an external resource, Mozilla Developer Network or something. And so the first couple of weeks, all they were doing was writing down reflections. It was almost like an English class. Probably some people, was this an English class? Because I was just having them write like a half a page or a page. Tell me how you feel about this. What things were familiar to you? What was strange? Have you seen any of this before? Can you think of any analogies? So it's a reflections document before we actually ever did anything on the keyboard. And it was almost like something I learned a few years ago, like the rubber band theory. I think some of the more excited students were like, okay, when do I actually get to use this stuff, right? So we're building up that impulse so that they're like, okay, finally this week, okay, I want to get into it. Actually, I'm tired of reading about it. And then I should backtrack a little bit. The first week, which I've never done this lesson before, but it got a good feedback from what I read in the reflections. The very first lesson, which is based upon a page from the Mozilla curriculum, is called Soft Skills. But it's not soft skills like about talking to people. It's about soft skills in terms of learning, the idea of continuous learning, the idea of setting up, like how comparing it to the gym, where you don't learn stuff by cramming the night before, how to ask questions, how to do some basic research and formulate your questions. And of course, trying to emphasize as much as possible that this is a safe space and all that stuff to ask questions. It's based upon, I remixed it, but if you go, in the Mozilla, go under their curriculum, they have like first steps or something. So I don't necessarily care for some of the stuff they put in there. So I'll copy and paste chunks of it, but I'll remix it. So I use that lesson as an inspiration, the soft skills. And a lot of people were like, "Oh, okay, that makes sense," because otherwise you get those questions like, "Oh, my code is broken," things that are not helpful. So I talked about the importance of, presenting context and screenshots and just a couple of blurs. What did you try? What do you expect to happen? Those types of, how do you ask good questions?
It's really interesting that we're having to teach that inside of like a code class at like a community college level or inside of like a
Yeah.
boot camp. It feels like this stuff about how to learn and how to tackle problems
Yeah.
should
How
be
to learn.
taught earlier, right? And
Yeah.
I'm having struggles like how to even start to approach a problem, what to
Yes.
do, like when I'm teaching it. So like I've had to even dial that back a little bit. So fascinating how we're similarly in the graphic design space where I'm at, right? Adobe and the tools there, similar to like VS Code and the IDEs where you're coding, everyone just wants to rush. Everyone seems to want to just rush to the tool to start typing. And I love
Yeah.
what you're doing, getting them to think up first, because at the end of the
Mhm.
day, problem solvers solve problems no matter what
Yes.
tools they use.
Yeah, that's what they all the LinkedIn posts say. Oh, developers don't write code; they're paid to, or whatever term people do. Software engineers, they're in charge of solving problems. The code doesn't matter, sort of.
until the code's broken, then it matters a whole bunch.
Yeah, well, of course, all the magical AI bots are going to write all the code for everybody these days, supposedly. So,
That's going to be a great topic of conversation for us. But before we go there, I want to kind of finish
yeah,
off a little bit of the learning stuff.
yeah.
How are the students responding? I mean, you mentioned that they were some excited, but along the way with working with beginners, what are some of the more frustrating things that you're running into trying to like teach anybody anything new, but specifically in your space? Where are they
Well,
stumbling a little bit?
yeah, I mean, it's a little bit different. Like that's one thing about 100%. When I say it's 100% online, it's async. So I don't ever see their. I mean, so I don't. It's not really that same level of feedback. So I just have to kind of guess based upon those written reflections. But I
I
will
love
say
that
this.
idea, by the way. That
Yeah.
idea of getting written reflections back weekly is everyone should be doing that. That's awesome.
Oh yeah. The other thing that I did for the online course is I'm in the syllabus and stuff. We haven't tapped into that yet, but I realize that these folks. And now, of course, not everybody in the class is taking the class to get a job in software engineering or anything. They have all kinds of paths, but I have to present the class, and cater to that particular group of people. So there's nothing really in the program or anything that's making them comfortable about talking about technical topics. So the other thing we're going to be doing is everybody has their camera and stuff like that. I mean, we're not trying to make professional YouTube videos, but on some of those reflections, at least the first one, I had them just get on camera and just tell me a couple things about themselves, stuff like that, because I made it clear that as we get into the code, it's not. I'm actually, when I do my grading, I almost don't even care about the code itself, because quite frankly, almost anybody can take this stuff and regurgitate some AI code and probably it'll pretty much work. The code to some extent doesn't actually matter, but your presentation of the code and walking me through your thought process, what prompts did you give the AI, what were some of the struggles, what were some of the things you had to maybe fight with the AI a little bit if you use that, and then putting in the code comments and stuff like that. But yeah, we'll get into the AI, but yeah, I have a whole piece about that also.
It's this same approach I'm like beating over the head of my students. I don't care if your code works or not. That's not the point.
Yeah.
Can you explain what your code is doing? Can you
Yeah.
read the code? Could you tell me what line by line is going on with your code? That's more
Yeah,
important than
exactly.
whether it works or not. Yeah.
Yeah, understanding the thought process, recognizing we haven't even gotten into the code part, but recognizing some of those principle of what we would call clean code, or why things go a certain way, because that's how I use AI all day every day pretty much in my real job. But based upon all of my experience, I know when it's crap code, and then I'll work with AI. I'll say, hey, this part here, doesn't adhere to this particular principle. Let's go ahead and improve that. But it's almost like I'm teaching the AI, so it's not just like, oh, magic, copy
You're
and
training
paste.
your job replacement.
Yeah, pretty much, but no, I mean, that's a whole different sort of area. But suffice to say, like, having the AI as a getting out of the teaching mindset for a minute, and just as a professional developer, I love, there's a lot of conversation about it taking jobs. No, I love it. Like, I am now able to move a lot quicker and solve more interesting problems, and not deal with the physical act of sitting there typing every last brace and semicolon and backspacing when I screw up and stuff like that.
Yeah, you're plugging things in together instead of hardwiring the freaking soldering the board together, right? Like, that's basically what it's turned into. Yeah. No, well, I was going to finish your thought because I was going to move on to talking about your career.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I was. You mentioned the soldering. So the analogy here is that, whatever. I mean, I don't know the history of, assembly line and all that, but when people put things together in the factory, yes, somebody had to physically tighten the screws and assemble everything by hand. And now that's highly automated, but there are still people are just working on the more interesting aspects. They're maintaining the machines and the robots that are doing this. They're able to optimize the processes to get more productivity. They're still doing quality control. They're just not sitting there manually, wearing out their wrists turning a screwdriver anymore. And I'm not wearing out my fingers typing out every last character. So it's just the continuing evolution. I don't see that as a threat to take my job. It's an opportunity for me to produce more and solve more interesting problems, and not be bogged down in mundane details that I'm, quite frankly, are not inspiring at all.
So what are you doing now as a career outside of academia?
But it's a company called Plan a Day, and it's based out of Toronto, but there's also the office in the U. It's 100% remote and everything like that. There's no like actual office, so that's great. But the reason why they're in Las Vegas is that's where our primary customers are. So the main product that we're providing is the software product is on multiple kiosks all across Las Vegas at like Caesars, MGM Grand, Resorts World, all of the Venetian, all of these big hotels. So in those lobbies and places, folks can go up there and work on this kiosk. And the reason it's called Plan a Day is the unique offering here is that it integrates with Ticketmaster, AXS, Fair Harbor, all of these multiple, anything dealing with attractions, entertainment, restaurant reservations, all of that. We integrate with all of these things. And what that allows somebody to do is go to one kiosk and say, okay, I want Donny Osmond tickets added to the cart. I want to make reservations at this restaurant. I want to go see this show. So I want to go skydiving. So it's basically a seamless single checkout experience. And so you're able to just do anything and everything pretty much there is to do in Las Vegas, for instance. And it works because of these integrations with all of these other providers. So it's Plan a Day. You can book and plan your entire day on one cart checkout experience. And then, you get the QR codes to your phone, all that good stuff. So that's what the product is.
I'm assuming your itinerary, everything else, kind of.
Yeah.
You've got one app to manage your experience. That's great.
Yes, the itinerary. It's you have your itinerary on the kiosk and everything, and then it also helps out the concierges. It's really like the other part of the software. I don't work on this part, but yeah, this is where like essentially some of these like high rollers and stuff might go to a concierge and say, hey, I need you to plan out the stuff. And so this is taking some of the work, taking their no, it's not taking their job, it's making their jobs easier. Yeah, to where almost everybody can sort of have their own private, concierge or personal concierge through this kiosk interface. So the primary deployment is on these kiosk interfaces. But yeah, there is the website, web platform, and all that stuff too. So yeah.
Was this like a new product that you got to work on, or did you come in after it was already deployed and were adding in new features?
So the original, so originally it was just an idea from the CTO of this company and the CEO, both out of Toronto, and it was just something they were just spinning up to try with, I guess, a property called like the Strat or something up in Toronto. I don't know the exact history. So it was just like the CTO just cranked out all this code and kind of got the idea going, and then it kind of spread from there. So it's a fairly new company, but I mean, I think 5 or 6 years. So when I came in, was I think 20, basically almost 2 years ago, and so at first it wasn't clear like where I would exactly fit in. So yes, to answer your question, there was a version 1 of this product already deployed. At the same time, they had contracted with this design team, external design team, that had created all these new components and things in Figma, a design program, right? And so my role was, okay, we're going to bring you in as the person that knows how to do all this React stuff, because the code and all that stuff was, I don't think they'll have a problem me saying it. It was less than stellar. I'll just say that. The code quality was less than stellar. I was shocked that it even worked, but it worked. So I was able to come in and was once again given full creative control to architect it from a blank screen, a completely new repository from scratch. You pick the tech stack. Here's the Figma components they designed. You use these or don't use these, and get to work building the version 2 of the user interface of this product. So that's what I've been working. That's what I worked on for almost a year. We're just now launching and updating pretty much all the kiosks here these last couple of months to use the new interface, the new version 2. So that I'm primarily architected and deployed all that.
How's the launch going then?
Yeah, I mean it's going great. Like the first few was, I think, was the Venetian or whatever properties it was, some properties there. And so just in phases. The person that's on the ground there in Las Vegas, he coordinates with all the concierge. So he comes in there, gives them the demo of version 2. He gets really good feedback. The original version was built on something called Semantic UI, which is just kind of an older, outdated, clunky looking UI. Library, just pre-built components. So these are all customized components with the branding and stuff that was established in the Figma fully. So I built out a completely custom UI library of components, and then we're putting them together for these various interfaces.
So when we talk about components, help me understand what do you mean?
Yeah, so when you go to any website, instead of thinking about it in the modern development mindset, it used to be, okay, this is an HTML page, and it is still an HTML page, but how did it become an HTML page? From the behind the scenes as a developer, we want to split things up into various reusable components. So like the header, and then on the main page, like for this particular app, we have some sort of images, an image grid that pops up. Let's say you go to / Carrie Underwood or some show. It's going to have like all the images of the show. And that's going to be one component. It's an image grid component. Above that is a custom header. And so that's going to deal with, okay, does this particular deployment for this property, should there be a login button or not? Is this a concierge? So there's various conditions that come into play as to what we're supposed to show in the header and what's supposed to show in the image grid component. So a component just taking the page that you see and breaking it up into reusable pieces so that we can fully customize those pieces, feed in various pieces of data so we can, make it as customizable as possible. We're not going to go in here and manually like copy and paste HTML for each one of these properties and change, the text and all that stuff. We need a dynamic way to render these components. So that's what we mean by components, taking a page and breaking it up into the various pieces. So like I said, the image grid, then right below that is like going to be the ticket fields, like where you pick out your quantities, maybe like a drop down component, different form components, and we put them, reassemble and remix them as needed.
So how much, I mean, I already know the answer to this, but how much and how are you using AI in your day-to-day as a developer?
Oh yeah, quite a bit. So I guess, and anytime, well, there's a couple of cases where I'll use it. I mean, sometimes I'm working on something and I'll be like, boy, this just doesn't look right. Something
You mean
is slightly
the code?
off.
The code doesn't look right.
Either the
Is that what
code
you-
or the UI, but usually something in the code. I'm like, this just seems like it's overly bloated. It looks like what we would call a case to refactor. In refactoring, we're not really fixing anything or any bugs or adding a feature, but we're making the code hopefully easier to work with for me and any other developer to come in. So that's a great spot for AI where I'll say, hey, you know what? My favorite one to work with, I mean, within VS Code, we have like the Copilot, which is fine when I say I'm using AI all the time because it's giving you those auto completes. Sometimes it's garbage, and sometimes like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I wanted. One key, and I've written 10 lines of code. That's cool. So again, you have to know what the heck you're doing, otherwise you're going to flood it up with garbage. Now, my favorite AI assistant is definitely Claude Sonnet. Claude is very, very good. So I will take my file and I'll upload it to Claude. It's a separate interface, and I'll say, hey, give me a code review on this. You review this as a senior developer. Look for things regarding like these certain architectural principles. Give me a code review, and so I'll use AI to give myself a code review and look for opportunities to clean it up. But yeah, obviously, if I'm stuck on a bug, I'll feed that into Claude. And sometimes it's complete like, no, that definitely doesn't make sense. And so we'll have a conversation, just like, kind of like a person. So I'm using it, quite a bit all the time. And it'll usually get me like 80 to 90% of the way. And then I'm cleaning up some of the messy stuff. That's like, no, that's not how we actually do this. This is the old way of doing it. So let me remix it. So again, you can't just copy and paste it. That's a recipe for disaster. You got to understand it.
It's similar to when I did my master's project. I coded something in PHP, a language I had
Yeah.
no clue.
Yeah.
Right. And at certain points I started copy pasting from Stack Overflow, just throwing spaghetti at a wall. It was the same thing, right? If you don't know what you're doing, if you don't know what you're copy pasting from some resource you find on the internet, thing that spit out via an LLM.
Yeah. You mentioned Stack Overflow. That's what I was using 3 years ago. Now I use Stack Overflow maybe once a month, if that. And usually when I use Stack Overflow, it's like, oh yeah, I already asked this question. I remember this answer now. So there's a couple of questions I always forget, and I know if I put it into Stack, it'll come right to where I expect. So yeah, it basically in a way replaces Stack Overflow without all of the extra commentaries and all that stuff. Allows me to cut right to the chase. So I use it, like I said, for code reviews. So I'm using it for with a fair amount. But again, you have to really the context. It needs to be supervised, and it needs to be provided the right context of how this is being used and what parts you're actually caring about and all of that stuff. So again, ultimately, it just saves me from physically using my fingers to type is how I look at it.
And like you said, it allows your brain to use more energy for bigger, more interesting problems. Yeah,
absolutely.
So how much are you bringing up AI with your students in the code space?
Yeah. So we just, in our last lesson, I put them in the syllabus. I said, I didn't make it mandatory. I said, hey, you should pay $20 a month for a Claude Sonnet subscription. It's optional, but it's, if you want to, I say, hey, you didn't have to buy an overpriced textbook. So maybe in lieu of that, consider spending $20 a month on this. It's up to you. And then fortunately with the if they have a student email, well, I think GitHub Copilot has a free plan now that works anyway. But as a student, if you have a student email, you can get the GitHub student, developer thing, and they give you all kinds of free stuff. So regardless, they have Copilot, and I've told them all about Claude. It's not like I'm going to, hide AI, because again, I want to make this as close to the real world as possible. And I don't want them I want to be able to give them more challenging things, not just a classic, sum up the numbers from 1 to 10. We're not going to be doing that. We might just as a quick warm up, but that's not going to be our homework. 3 years ago, that would have been maybe our homework assignment. Go write a loop that does this. No, that's a waste of time. So I've done that. So I did another reflection on it. I said, what are your feelings on AI? Have you used it in the past? Don't worry, I'm not going to snitch to your other instructors, all that other stuff. And yeah, a lot of, actually, surprisingly, the feedback I got from there is several of the students on their own accord said, yeah, I'm not sure if I should be using AI that much because it may hinder how much I actually learn in this class. So I was very impressed that the students themselves, and this could be just like, I don't know these folks, this is all just asynchronous online, but I was surprised that at least a handful of students weren't like, oh, I just want to get the stuff done and move on with my day. They were like, well, I'm a little bit concerned because I want to make sure I actually kind of learn this stuff.
Maybe they program their AI agents to be curious learners.
That's true. Then they already know more about AI than I do. But no, we're gonna use it. But I'm just gonna show them like basically what I described, how I use it in real life, and I'm gonna say, okay, as I'm making the video, I'm like, oh, this completion here, that's complete garbage. Here's why. Here's actually what we want to do. And I encourage that, like, you can go to Claude and put it on explainer or whatever, detail mode, some other mode, and you can just say, hey, explain the most commonly used Git commands, and it'll basically generate additional content, ask me some questions. So yes, I'm all about teaching them how to use AI, but it's a balancing act for sure.
If you use it to help you do better searches for information, it's much more effective than trying to use Google to find things.
Oh, I barely Google anything. Yeah, unless I go into a specific documentation I already know about. I don't even use Google or a search engine.
So we're kind of like doing a loop here. Back to wrestling.
Oh yeah.
I know that you've talked to me about doing a podcast and doing some media stuff around wrestling.
Yeah.
Where's that at, man? What are you thinking? I think you wore the T-shirt, man. I think you got to go for it, bro.
I've actually got this feedback because, like, kind of a little bit of an aside. I have this camping trip I go on with some people that from college, like 30 years ago. We've stayed in touch from like the dorms and stuff, and like two times a year we go to this campground. And so none of them are really wrestling. They kind of remember, hey, you used to watch that stuff, and I have a wrestling T-shirt on, of course, so they'll ask about it, and I'll explain to them how things work, and they actually are like, oh, okay, that's pretty. And one of them specifically said, I think that was the inspiration of it. One of them specifically said, you should just do like a podcast, for folks such as myself that maybe don't really care about it, but are mildly curious, about how stuff works. So that's where it came from. So yeah, the name of it would be, the name of the channel is Respect for Wrestling, but the part that I'm missing, I have in my head how I want like the branding and the logo to work. And I just have to have somebody kind of create that for me. And so I haven't really moved on it. And I probably should.
You should 100%, dude. You're so awesome to talk with about all the everything, but like right now, just sketch the logo and put it in like Adobe. There's tools that'll generate it for you, man. Like, give it to me and I'll put it in DALL-E and we can make it happen. But yeah, DALL-E is doing a really good job with image generation right now. Yeah, it's less cumbersome than Midjourney.
I don't remember because I don't get into the image yet. I think I did try one of those, but it was like hit or miss. Yeah, you know what? I can sketch it. I can sketch it out. But it's basically like R4W, like respect for wrestling, and that would be like because at the like Royal all these events they have like the post. The press conference after the fact, and some of these folks back there, because they don't actually show the people, like you just hear them, when they on the mic when they ask their questions. And I'm like, some of these questions are just how are these people allowed to come this privilege of coming in here, probably seeing the show and getting backstage for free or whatever,
at least some merch out of it, right? I mean,
how are they being? So when I heard it, I'm like, I don't know. I feel like the passion that I have for the business as a whole, the respect I have for it, and some of the questions they ask, I'm like, no, that's not the right question to ask given this particular opportunity. So yeah, it's kind of just been in the back of my mind. But yeah, that's a good point. I should just sketch it out and maybe just have it kind of put together or whatever. And then from there, I was like, well, I have some ideas for my content. I mean, I see some people on YouTube where it's not like a bunch of fancy like graphics, and they're not, it's just them kind of hanging out and talking, and it seems to work. So that would be the simplest rendition. Get some sort of basic
TikTok would eat it up
branding.
too, man. Yep.
Oh, okay, yeah,
TikTok would eat it
I'm
up
not,
too.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, and then just doing, some sort of, and I think that maybe, I don't know how many people out there. I mean, there's all kinds of wrestling fans, and some people are like closet wrestling fans or something. But I'm 100. Oh, I'll mention this with wrestling. If you check out any of my, I don't write too much on LinkedIn, but I just did a post last week, and it's about different types of developers, and I 100% pull in so many wrestling analogies and catchphrases. It is my favorite thing I've ever written. I just wrote it like 4 or 5 days ago.
Where's that at? You said it on LinkedIn?
Yeah, it's on LinkedIn. It's my featured post. I am so proud of that post. But
you'll need like a Substack or a Medium or something, right? Because what I'm finding is right now, I'll do a podcast. I'll throw and dump the transcript into ChatGPT and say, "Hey, turn this into like an article." Like, the idea of being able to
does that,
refactoring not refactoring, repurposing content is so easy right now. Like, and especially like if you've got a good source and good insight into things, all day, man. If you got to go for it, dude.
Yeah, like in that particular post, it talks about, like, because in wrestling we have, some, and I'll leave it if somebody wants to, I tell you what this means in the post. But yeah, we have this term called being a jobber versus a top guy in wrestling, being a locker room leader. And I relate all of that with as many, I reference The Rock, I reference, all kind, like the yeet is like the biggest thing in Jey Uso's yeet. That's the biggest catchphrase. LA Knights, catchphrases. But my personal kind of brand now, because I wrote another post kind of after that, I'm always going to put, this is going to be my signature. I don't care if it's, unprofessional or whatever. The last line of every post, I'm always going to say, most importantly, I acknowledge my tribal chief, Roman Reigns. That's my last line of every post going forward.
Nice. Oh, that's great, dude. Yeah, it's been phenomenal, especially because like when we talk about content, and working with AI. AI really, I think, does a phenomenal job of taking content you give it and turning it into something else, whether it's taking a transcript and getting an article, YouTube description out of it, short form content. You can really lean in and leverage some of the tools to where you can sit down for maybe a half hour post match and get tons of varied content out of it. Just even like reflecting on certain things. I think that's, and as people who are teaching, right, one of the biggest things that we have to do, and where all the good stuff is, it's in the reflection. That reflection of what we did, right? The reflection of the match. What does that mean? What might that mean going forward? Goldberg pile drived Stone Cold Steve Austin. Who knows? I'm pulling names out of the air that don't exist necessarily anymore. Goldberg came back though, didn't he?
No, he had he has some one-off things he did. I believe the last thing he did was it was The Fiend, Bray Wyatt, rest in peace, Bray Wyatt, and Goldberg. I think that was the last match that they had, few years ago, pre-pandemic, I think.
Some of my best content is in a similar space, like the Detroit Lions, or I shouldn't say best. Some of the content I get the most action on is talking about the Detroit Lions and talking about other fans. Any place where you've got people doing this, and I know wrestling is a place where people do that. That's prime, man. I go for it, dude. You have to.
Like even the first bit of content would be kind of like how we opened up here, was just talking about, where, like, because I have a kind of a unique perspective in that I'm more of a fan now than I ever was like as a kid. It's like reverse. And then, there's still like that old school unfortunate stereotype that, wrestling fans are just some type of like trailer park, or, these silly stereotypes that people, they're just too dumb to realize that it's quote unquote fake, which that's a whole content. Let's talk about the F word in wrestling. That's a whole different content. Yeah, that's the wrestling F word. That's what it is. So, but anyway, yeah, respect for wrestling, and so clearly I'm not, just some clueless, trailer park person or whatever it is. Not that there's anything wrong with being in the trailer park. Don't want to draw heat for that.
Oh, see, there you go. You're already gonna get.
Yeah,
you're already gonna get like 1,000 million views from that, bro, from just that line.
I'm drawing off of that unfortunate stereotype and analogy that exists, and those are the things I would bring about why I have respect for wrestling. Where does
and I think that's a great, and if you always approach it from the perspective as like you do with your coding stuff, like being a teacher and fellow learner, I think that's a phenomenal angle. That's a phenomenal.
Yeah, I should have added my headline on here that says I acknowledge my tribal chief. That should have been my headline on here.
Oh, all right, Manav. That's all the time that we're gonna have. I've got some other stuff, and I know you and I could probably talk forever, but if we keep going, this will end up being 3 hours long, and oh my goodness, that's a lot of editing for me. So,
right. I appreciate it. All right, thanks, appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate your time, Manav. You take care, and we'll see you on the LinkedIn and hopefully on the pages of some wrestling magazine someday. How's that?
Yeah, maybe so, or at least hear my voice in one of these backstage press conferences. That just one time would be us a bucket list there. All right, thanks again. See ya.
Take care, Manav. Make it happen.